Hi everyone, welcome back to Sonor Family. I'm your host, Zack Stewart. Up next, we have part 2 of my chat with Steve Smith. I think you guys will find very interesting, and I hope you enjoy it. Take care. Well, I think something you said, early on in your kind of relationship with them that I think, a lot of young drummers need to hear today is, you bought the drums and you played them because you liked them. I think people start getting to a certain level or think they're at a certain level, and it just becomes, I'll play whoever will give me something or stuff like that. And I think that needs to be more out there that's not how this works in the drumming world, unless you just luck into some giant, massive, arena selling out gig right out of the gates, play the gear that you love and you feel speaks to you, and
still play the gear that you love.
Yeah.
Because you can afford to buy it.
Yeah, I know.
So, that's really the point. I've always played exactly what I wanted to play. And, I grew up playing Zildjian cymbals. And so it's naturally, I want to play Zildjian cymbals. I grew up playing Remo heads, and, I play Remo heads. And so when I went to see Remo Belli after I was playing for a few months with Jean-Luc Ponty, and, I talked to him about getting an endorsement. And so this is back in 1977. And, I asked if I could have a meeting, and he was very gracious and said, yeah, let's have a meeting. So I told him I wanted to be an endorser. And he goes, well, that's great. I'm glad you like my product. Let's talk in 5 years to see if you're still around. Because he goes, you got a great gig now. It's a really good gig. You're playing with Jean-Luc Ponty. But, I want good players, professionals, but you're going to have to have a long career for me, for him, Remo, to have me part of the Remo family. So I felt like that was just realistic feedback. I accepted that completely. And then a few years later, I went back and I was still around, so I became a Remo endorser. So, that's really the key. It's not, it's what you want to play, and then hopefully you can work out a situation with the company. But the main thing is you have to love whatever the gear is, and really and that integrity makes a huge difference, that you really believe in the product.
No, absolutely. I mean, you talked about Bernard Purdy kind of selling you on it. I mean, I'm 35, and growing up, when I thought of Sonor, you're one of the guys I thought of, and so seeing the great players that they have involved, with the company was what made me kind of, go, okay, this is somewhere where if I make a career of this, this is somewhere I want to be. So
right on.
So in the 70s, you would have a phonic kit to start out with.
Yeah, Sonor Phonics. And my first 2 or 3 kits were Sonor Phonics, until they came up with, now I don't remember what the name of the kit was, but it was like these square sizes. It's when they started to make the really deep toms. Like it would be 8x8 and 10x10 and 12x12. And my rack toms were 14x14.
Was that the Phonic Plus, I think?
No, Signature. Would it be Signature?
Yeah. Well, the Signatures, I've got one of those. They had that. The Signatures, they were mostly square sizes. Yeah.
And that's when there's a Journey live in Houston, 1981, where I have this red drum set, with the really big toms, and I'm kind of sitting really low and the toms are up to here. That's when I switched over to that kit for a while, because it was the thing to do and it looked great.
Yeah.
It sounded good. But I wouldn't say it sounded better than the Sonor Phonics. So, in fact, okay, if and in a way, I think those drums were short-lived, and then people went back to more normal sized toms and bass drums. Like for me, like these bass drums, my SQ2 kit that you see here, it's a traditional bass drum size. It's a 22 by 14. So, and back when I was first starting out in the 60s and the 70s, all bass drums were 14 inches deep, whether it was an 18 or a 26, it didn't matter. It was always 14 inches deep. And there's just something about the sound and the feel of that I really like. So that's what I have here. That's what I ordered when I put this kit together. If you've seen some of my earlier From the Practice Room videos, I had my Sonor Phonics kit that I used in 1980, 81.
I've seen that.
So,
veneer or something?
The oak veneer, kit is the kit that I used on the Journey album called Captured, and then Escape and Frontier. So that is a really great sounding kit. I, of course, still have it. I've gotten rid of some of my older kits because I just don't have room to save them all as I get some newer kits. But that kit I've kept ever since I got it in 1980, and it's been set up in this practice room. It was set up here for about 4 years, and it was my kit that I came to practice to. That when I'm here now, that kit has 24 by 14 inch bass drums, and the 3 racks and 3 floor toms. And so I filmed a lot of solos and things on that kit. And then I put that kit in a storage unit and then put this SQ2 in here now. So when you see me mixing up the pieces, it's just because I recorded a bunch of solos on that kit. And now, I'm using this kit. I might change this one out in a month or so, because I have the other kit that I have here is a vintage kit, a really beautiful, vintage kit like I see behind you, like that marine pearl, and with a 22-inch bass drum. And so I have that. At some point I might switch it out. Just it's fun to change up the kits, and when I do come out here and practice, to have something a little different to practice on.
Yeah. One thing I noticed on that Phonic kit, I've had some older Phonic kits, kind of from that era. The only thing I have personally is a signature kit. Just out of my own curiosity, I noticed you switched out the hoops from. Did that originally maybe come with the Pharaoh, the metal hoops on the bass drum, or did that have wood hoops to
No,
start?
it came with metal hoops.
Okay.
Yeah,
just a sound choice, or
I
less?
felt like. I don't know if it was imagination or if it was real, but it just seemed like I wanted a warmer sound than the metal hoops. Yeah, because the drums did come with the metal hoops then. So I switched them out and got some wooden hoops for that kit.
Okay. Yeah, I just ordered a set of wood hoops for my an original set for the signature kit, so I'll have to give that a try and see how that sounds.
Yeah, cool.
So, as you were saying, and I think you're very well known, you have really continued to evolve as a drummer, which I know has been a big inspiration to me, and I'm sure a lot of other people, because obviously a lot of people kind of get 1 or 2 gigs and they kind of, I'll say coast, but they do enough to get by, they almost use their success to maybe get involved in something else, or to have more just free time to sit around and do something else. So I really find it unique, because a lot of drummers who are like yourself, who are kind of always evolving and progressing, they usually end up changing companies for sound and for whatever else, their things evolve. So, what is it over the 40 plus years that you think has been, because obviously Sonor has evolved with different shell materials and drums and everything else, but I guess what's kind of, as your progression has continued, that's made you say, okay, these drums still, help me speak.
Well, the drums have evolved over the years, and as much as I love the sound of the drums, my earliest sets, my original sets from '77, and actually then like one of my from the practice room videos, it's just me playing with a bass drum and a snare drum playing brushes, and that bass drum, like I bought a 1974 Sonor jazz kit that sounds great, that I still have and use occasionally on gigs. But as the company changes, they're introducing new drums, new hardware. In a lot of ways, the new hardware has really improved the sound of the drums. Like, as good as the drums sounded from the 80s, they had the hardware that in some ways can diminish the sound of the drums, because to mount the tom, you have to put a bracket inside the drum itself, which it vibrated a little bit less. So, the hardware is improved to the point where the drums sing more. And the quality, it's been high and it remains high. And I find that even, or I say even, but the drums that are made in China, I find them to sound really great as well. The only thing my only but is that I have to put really good heads on those drums. So when when I go on tour, I carry like just a really kind of basic simple bag like that without a peg holding the cymbals together, because I carry a full set of heads with me.
Okay.
So when I if I'm on tour, like earlier last year, I did like a 2-week tour of China, and all over the country, one-nighters, every night a different drum set from Sonor. And if the drums show up and they have the heads that come from the factory, they're the Chinese-made Remo heads.
Yeah. Not
so great sounding, And so I put brand new Remo heads on those drums, and then they sound great. They sound really amazing. So that would be my recommendation if you're going to buy, one of those Sonor kits that come from China. Invest in a really good set of Remo heads. I also use that same method because sometimes when I get a drum set, again from Sonor, and I could be anywhere from Italy to France, and it's the drums are beat up because they're rental drums, and Sonor will deliver them to me to the gig, and it'll just have some heads that look like craters on the moon. Somebody's really beat them up. So I put the new heads on, and they sound great. So the drums themselves always sound good. It's just but you also have to have good, nice heads on the drums so they resonate.
Yeah.
Now, if you want to get into the whole, touring, especially like drums du jour, I also take cymbal optimizers with me, because I noticed the main thing that's messed up about rental drums are the felts that come on the cymbal stands. They're without a doubt, they're trashed always. Yeah. So here I carry a whole bunch of these cymbal optimizers with me. And the other thing is I carry the Dario, pure sound snare wires, because that'll be the other thing. Sometimes the snares show up, and and people have really bent them out of shape, and so I'll put those on. So those things will get me through the gig when I have less than ideal drums. But the common thread is that I have been super fortunate to always get a Sonor kit wherever it is that I'm traveling to.
Yeah, we were another guy I was speaking to. You know, it's funny you talk about the backline kits. I mean, I don't know how many times I've turned over a snare drum and told them like, this head has been on here for 10 years because this is the logo head. You know, like it needs to be changed, but you know, it's just some guy who's pushing cases. You know, usually who you have to speak to. So yeah, I get that issue, but even with some of the older Sonor stuff, you know, and either our production guy or myself dealing with the backline company, sometimes if they have an older Sonor kit, they'll say, well, it's, you know, 20, 30 years old, but here's this newer X brand. Would you want that instead? I'm like, no, I want the Sonor. And I've always found that even then those drums, because a lot of times those newer kits will show up for somebody else on the bill, especially if it's a multi-act festival. So I hear and see those drums and I'm like, yeah, this kit that you thought was so bad because of age, like this need to be tuned and maybe the head's changed and this sounds, I'll put this against anything else up here, you know? So it's just like, you know, that quality. And I think kind of you were saying earlier, you know, there's really not an era that I can think of where people think of, you know, Sonor making questionable drums.
Didn't happen. Never happened.
Yeah, and a lot of the other companies who've been around for that amount of time because of, like you said, ownership changes or whatnot, that affected the manufacturing. And so maybe for a few years it was like, you don't want to play those drums. But yeah, with the Sonor
or they had to change factories or something. I mean, the Sonor factory has been there for quite a long time since, you know, I'm not exactly sure, but I think at least from the 50s, 1950s, something like that. And it's still the same factory that I went to in 1977, though, of course, it's gone through evolution and changes and upgrades. But, you know, it is what it is. In fact, if you know, this is 5 years ago now, but in 2015, when Sonor introduced the vintage kit, that was because of it's one of the anniversaries of Sonor. I don't remember exactly which one, like 125th or 140th. That's what it was.
Yeah.
And there's a really very cool video of filmed in the factory. Like there's a video of me playing like, I don't know what, a 10-minute solo, like right in the middle of the factory. And then there's a video of me playing with Benny Greb and Tomas Haake that, you know, we all converged there to play for the same vintage. We all played the same kit.
It was funny when those came out, you know, in the circle of kind of working drummers in Nashville. I can't say that very often we talk about drum advertising, you know. And I remember not long after that having lunch with a bunch of guys, and that came up, and everybody who, you know, most of them are involved with different brands, but they were like, you know, of course, everybody, you know, yourself and Benny and Thomas sounded great playing in the video, but just it was just done really well, very tastefully done, very creative with the factory setup there, and of course you can hear the drums, and they sound great, and you know, it's like, again, kind of a cool homage to that vintage era, also to see the machinery behind you guys.
Right.
So,
and those vintage drums have a very, very cool sound, and there's a couple of reasons. Like part of it was when I came up with my 30th anniversary kit. I worked on that kit with Karl-Heinz Menzel, and Karl-Heinz started with Sonor in 1977, the same year I did. So, So,
Okay.
and I met him the first time that I went to the factory, and then I think it was 79, must have been 79. And so we worked together on that kit. And by that time, Sonor was not making the beech shells anymore. They'd moved on to birch and maple, and in some ways following trends of other drum manufacturers, because those shells became popular. But I always loved the sound of the beech shells, my older drums. So that was the first thing I decided on with my 30th anniversary kit, that they be made of beech. Well, after Karl-Heinz heard those drums, I'm sure it influenced him to say, hey, let's come out with beech again, which they did. And then shortly after that, those vintage drums, which of course are made out of beech, because that's what all Sonor drums were made out of in the 60s and in the 70s. And then it has to do with the bearing edges, like the way they made the bearing edges on the vintage kit is like they made the bearing edges on those kits in the 60s, which it just gives a big, round, dark, deep tone. Yeah. Which is so much of why people love the sound of vintage drums, because they have this big, open, warm sound versus, let's say, like with this kit, the bass drums are made of beech. Mm-hmm. The toms are made of maple, but the bearing edges are modern. So they have more high end. They have that attack. You hear the depth, but you hear the high end, kind of attack, which, knowing that I was going to be using this kit on tour with Journey, I wanted it to have that big full sound, but with a strong attack, kind of transient with the modern bearing edge. But with my vintage kit that, I've yet to bring in here, that's just like big, full, round, very warm sound. So just a completely different sounding drum set.
Yeah, no, I think that's, one of the awesome parts about it is that there is kind of that variety, because there are some other, you can kind of fake that vintage sound in the studio. That's kind of, seems to be a bit of a thing people hear, especially in Nashville. One is that vintage drums, and and I'm a firm believer that a lot of times people hear vintage drums with their eyes. They want you to play a certain looking kit, and the producer or the artist will go, "Oh yeah, that's vintage," and we all know that you could put different heads and tune it and sound different. But with the the vintage drums, I've got kind of a shell bank that I've used with quite a few people in a lot of different settings, and the thing is, they get to that vintage sound authentically. I don't have to put a ton of things on it as far as moon gels or kind of the inserts in the bass or the tom heads or snare head. So they're I think it's great because again, like we said before, over the years so many companies change, and people might love the sound of those drums that were made in the 60s or 70s, but the drums that company makes now sound nowhere near those drums. And so people are kind of stuck without an option. So that's, I know for myself, working with different people, I love having that variety of sounds to pick from within the kind of production Sonor lines, Speaking of that kit behind you, I remember when they did a video with you putting that out. One thing I found really interesting was that you have a combination of woods on that. Is that the first kit you've done with different?
I'd say it is, because I love the sound of the vintage bass drum, and I also I had the benefit of working in the factory with Karl-Heinz, making my 30th anniversary set. So and that was 2016 with 2006, sorry, with 2007 being my 30th anniversary. So we would come up with an idea, and he'd tell one of the workers, and they'd go make the drum, and 2-3 hours later we'd be putting heads on it and trying it out. And one of the things that I found was we tried the different thickness shells, and the bass drum sounded best with the thinner shell. And made of beech. So that's what this drum is, beech, and it's a thin shell, and it's 22 by 14. So that has like this. It's a pretty incredible sound acoustically.
Yeah.
But we found that we like the sound, or I like the sound of the toms, with slightly thicker shells. Not the thinnest shells I could get, but kind of medium. And I have an SQ2, another SQ2 kit, a beautiful SQ2 kit that you can see in this video that I did that is for Hudson Music, called "Standing on the Shoulders of Giants," Drum Legacy Standing on the Shoulders of Giants. In the studio, I'm using my 30th anniversary kit. There's a live gig live at the Modern Drummer Festival, and that I'm using a SQ2 kit, a really beautiful SQ2 kit. Those toms sound really fantastic to me, and they're made of maple. So I basically just wanted those same maple shells, for this kit, because I know they sound so big and warm with a lot of low end, and then the great attack for the high end.
Yeah. No, I mean, like I said, here in that kit, I believe there's a video of you like a sound check or something, kind of demonstrating that kit. And, I remember the first time hearing that, someone had mentioned, changing up the bass drum material, different from the toms. And so I think I've kind of made note of that setup myself. So next time
that's
I'm market for a kit,
Yeah, the Sonor configurator. You can, SQ2, basically what the SQ2 means is you can just design your own kit. You just put together whatever it is that you want. And this kit, I don't know if you can totally see it, but it's got 3 snare drums.
Oh yeah.
There's a chair there, so I can stand up and adjust that zoom there. But it has my metal, 30th anniversary snare, and then it's got basically a vintage snare. That's what it's a 14 by 5 3/4, and then it's got a 12 by 5.
Nice.
And that's I use this kit on the Journey tours, and having 3 snare drums is something that I've been doing for a few years. It gives me a lot of options. Of course, it gives me a lot of options in songs, for playing, an A part of a song on one snare, or B part of a song on another snare. But also, I got into it because I started doing this with Vital Information, and actually, I can trace it back to going to see the Broadway musical Hamilton with Andres Ferrero playing drums, and I love that musical so much. I've seen it 5 times, and I did help introduce Andres to the Sonor folks, and now he's a Sonor endorser. Yeah. And when I sat, one of the times that I saw the show, I was in the pit in the drum booth, and Andres had, I'm pretty sure, 5 snare drums as part of, and it's written into the musical to have 5 snare drums. Wow. It's, they're very specific. It's an incredible book, it's incredible music. And I could see the potential of having all those different sounds to use in the music. So I started doing that with Vital Information. And then I got into playing different snare drums, just soloing, just like I could use different toms when I'm playing a solo or a fill. I started, using different snares just as part of snare fills, which it's interesting, and it's unusual sounding to hear a snare fill where you hear the pitch change as you're playing. And it's because, I'll play a fill between three different snare drums. Like on my album, it's called
Nice.
what is it called? Heart of the City. That's when I first started recording that. And there's some solos and fills where I'm, playing the three different snare drums, and not necessarily just as, timekeeping, but, fills and stuff like that, which I just found to be really creative and very interesting.
Yeah. One thing, I played an event once, and that's the first time I got to play your signature metal snare drum. And I was just blown away how sensitive it was, but one thing I know kind of as a Sonor just fan and nerd was I really love the throwback with the lugs and everything to the old, like I guess like the Phonic era and stuff like that. What made you kind of decide for that sound to go with such kind of a thick, heavy drum, that metal snare?
Sure. Well, a good buddy of mine, Jeff Ogletree, had been, making snare drums for many years. And one of the hallmarks of his drums are they're made of heavy steel shells. And I love the sound of that. And so it's the sound that I get with that. It has the low end that I like to hear on a snare drum, yet plenty of brightness and high end. My problem with a lot of snare drums is that they're just too bright, too much high end and not enough low end. So with that heavy shell, I was able to get low end. And then the other thing that we did with that drum is we have two air holes, and they're kind of hidden. They're where the snare throw off is and the butt plate, on the other end. So there's, and with the two air holes that also drop the pitch a little bit. And then the drum is naturally bright. But the other thing that I do personally and the drum comes with this, I use a Remo Diplomat fiber skin head. Oh. Now I find my drum sounds ideal with that head because the fiber skin is naturally a little darker than white, the coated. Mm-hmm. But the fiber skin is, a very thin, the Diplomat is a very thin head. So, so it comes with that, with that head, which, gives a little bit more darkness to the drum. So it's not overly bright. And like you say, it's super sensitive. So yeah, it's a really, really excellent sounding main snare drum. The drum that I have here that's to my, to my left, the snare drum to my left is essentially, it's a vintage drum. It's the vintage 5 3/4 inch beach shell, but it has modern hardware. With my 30th anniversary drum, I wanted it to have that vintage hardware. And then I made a 40th anniversary snare drum that sold out pretty quickly. Yeah. That also had that same vintage hardware on it. And vintage, not all the way back to the teardrop, but vintage being like, late 70s, early 80s, like what's right behind you on that floor tom there.
Yeah. No, they're great drums. I haven't got a chance to check out the 40th, right?
40th, but we only made 77 of them, and they sold out like almost instantly. So maybe you can find one.
But
those sound great. That sounds very much like the vintage snare drum. It is essentially like that vintage snare drum.
So is that like for you? I know you play a lot of different projects and everything else. Is kind of your go-to setup these days the 3 rack toms and 2 or 3 floor toms, and then 2 or 3 snares? Is that kind of, if you're going to do almost any gig, that's what's you can bring with you?
Yes. Well, yes. I won't bring the double bass. I love playing the double bass, but it is hard to carry around, and a lot of the stages I play, there's not enough room for it. So yeah, 3 rack toms and 2 floor toms is what I've been playing for a very long time. And 2 or 3 snare drums now is pretty standard. 3 floor toms, I started with the 3 floor toms when I went back to playing with Journey in 2016. Now I really like playing with 3 floor toms. Like when I just played, that in early March, played a week in Australia, I was able to get a drum set with 3 floor toms, 3 rack toms, 3 floor toms. So, yeah, I really have fun with that. It gives me a wide melodic range, but I'll play whatever I need to play for the gig. Yeah. And what the stage allows. So for instance, hopefully this gig will happen, but the 3rd week of September, I'm booked to play in Birdland in New York City. It's a gig I do every September, so it's been booked since last September, and it's a tribute to John Coltrane with an all-star cast of really great New York players. But when I play there, I have a 18-inch bass drum, 1 rack tom, a floor tom. I still might bring 2 snare drums, but I use just a really basic kit because it's an all acoustic group. The stage isn't all that big, and so I'll play my Sonor kit that I keep in New York with the 18-inch bass drum. So so I'll adjust the kit depending on the gig.
Yeah. Well, Steve, I've really enjoyed this. Like I said, I do so many of these. It helps me learn more about Sonor drums and options, and what's available. And I think you've been just an amazing ambassador for the drums. Just in all, like I said, all the different years and all the different contexts and groups you've used them in. And like we were saying earlier, man, they always sound great. And it's because you always sound great. But as things start to kind of open back up, what kind of obviously you mentioned the date there in New York. What other projects do you have going on if the world starts to get back to a bit of a normal state?
Well, I'll eventually get back on tour with Vital Information, my jazz group. And I talked to Mike Stern the other day about, playing again. Like I've been playing with Mike actually ever since we went to Berkeley together in like 1973. We started playing, and we still play over the years. So probably be doing some touring with him. I've been doing a fair amount of touring with Tony Monaco, who's a really great Hammond B3 player. And I'm going to be putting out a little bit of some music with Tony, a great guitarist named Vinny Valentino, who also plays in Vital Information, but he's been, we did some organ trio things together. So, yeah, I don't know what else, other than that. We'll just see. Personally, I'm okay right now being off tour, just home. I don't mind it at all, actually, because I've been touring for many, many years and have put in lots and lots of hours and days and weeks on tour over the years. So it's actually pretty interesting to be home for a while and to not be on tour. But eventually I'll get back into it. But right now I'm enjoying being home. Yeah.
No, same way. This is my 15th year of being in Nashville and touring, and probably the longest I've ever been home. So it's been good. It's a way to recharge, I guess, other aspects of life. So in the meantime, where can people go to, I guess, kind of keep up to date with your projects as they start to happen?
Well, vitalinformation.com is my website. And Facebook, it's facebook.com/vitalinformation. And then both Twitter and Instagram, I'm at Steve Smith Drums. And so every week I put 1 or 2 solos up on all of those, including YouTube, which you can find through the Vital Information website. I have Steve Smith channel on YouTube. So I'm actually, I'm putting out these solos, but in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be putting out some educational brush stuff, like where I'm really talking about the basics of how I play brushes. There's a video DVD that I recorded in 2007 with Adam Nussbaum and some really incredible drummers. Adam and I co-produced it. Adam, who's a longtime Sonor endorser also.
Yeah.
The two of us with Rob Wallace and Paul Siegel from Hudson Music produced a great 7-hour DVD called The Art of Playing with Brushes. So, that's getting a lot of attention right now. People are really interested in playing with brushes right now. We're putting out a Zoom chat that we did recently with Adam, myself, and Jeff Hamilton. And so, I'll be putting out some of my own instruction on that. Some conical, some South Indian vocal percussion, and how I apply that to the drum set. That's something else that I'm going to be putting out soon with downloads, handouts, so to speak, that you can get at vitalinformation.com. So, I'm kind of ramping it up into some more educational material that I'm going to be releasing on from the practice room.
Well, while not on the road, it sounds like you are definitely staying busy.
I'm very busy. Yeah. Funny. It's like every day is like a long day with all kinds of stuff to do. Yeah.
Well, as a busy man you are, I want to thank you again for taking the time today to, sit down via our electronic meeting here and chat about Sonor Drums. Thank you again. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, Zach, and, it's been fun and good hanging, good talking, and we'll be in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. And for all you people at home, stay safe, stay healthy, stay positive, and thanks for watching.
All right. Bye-bye.